For this session, we are looking at the poem, the work poem, The Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot. First of all, we are going to look at the background or the introduction. The poem, The Journey of the Magi, is written by T.S. Eliot. It talks about the journey of the three wise men who journeyed to witness the birth of Christ. Now, when we look at this poem, the poem actually reflects both the physical journey of the Magi and the spiritual journey of the Magi. The poem was written in 1927 and was part of T.S. Eliot's collection of poems entitled Aerial Poems. It draws inspiration from the biblical accounts of the Magi's journey to Bethlehem as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Now we are going to look at the poem stanza by stanza. I'll read the poem first and then I will explain each of the stanzas. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year, for a journey and such a long journey. The ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter, and the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer places on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling, and running away and wanting their liquor and women. And the night fires going out and the lack of shelters, and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying this was all folly. In the first stanza of the poem, the poet actually talks about the difficulties that they encountered as the Magi made their journey to Bethlehem. Now, when we look at the difficulties, it actually talks about both the physical difficulties that they encountered on their way, that's what they encountered on their way to Bethlehem, and also the spiritual difficulties. Looking at the first line, it says, a cold coming we had of it. Now, the first four lines talks about the weather condition. At the time the Magi embarked on this journey, the weather was actually very, very terrible. It was in the dead of winter when the wind was cold and sharp. So these are all the things this is one of the things they encountered on their journey. He goes further to say, and the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory. Now this shows that it wasn't just the Magi that encountered difficulties. Even the camels that they traveled with also had their fair share of the experience. It says there were times we regretted. There were times we regretted hints at doubt. You know, at the start of the journey, having started this journey and having encountered these difficulties, there were moments where they had doubts, where they experienced doubts, where they wondered if actually the journey that they were embarking upon was actually worth it. So they continued. The summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls, sherbet, whatever. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling. Now, here, the poet refers to how the people they were traveling with actually even started reacting to the situation. Imagine that you are traveling with some men and then they started reacting negatively to the harsh weather condition, to the arduous or the monotony of the journey. So now, outside the physical experiences, or outside the physical meaning or the literal meaning of this, we're also looking at the extended, the spiritual meaning of stanza 1. Here, the poet actually looks at his own spiritual journey, and maybe not just his own spiritual journey, the spiritual journey of every Christian faithful, where upon starting out on their faith as Christians. Looking at it this way, you see that at the beginning of the spiritual journey, there were a lot of difficulties, there were doubts. So the lines in the first stanza are reflective of the difficulties that this poet encountered in the course of his spiritual enlightenment. So now looking at, it says, then and the night fires, okay, the camel men cursing and grumbling, the silken girls bringing sherbet, the camel men cursing and grumbling. This is evidence of the moral decadence that they experienced, maybe in the then society and even in the world that they found themselves in. Having started out on their spiritual journey, at some point they felt like they were not part of the world. They were not meant for the society in which they found themselves. So these few lines here are reflective of the decadent society, the morally decadent society in which they found themselves. He continues saying, and running away and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out, and lack of shelters, and the cities hostile, and towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty, charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. So he's emphatically stating that actually starting out on this journey was very difficult. They had such a hard time trying to one, go to witness the birth of Christ, and then two, beginning out or starting out on their spiritual journey. Then he continued and said, the last line in the first stanza says, this was all folly. We said, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. Now, this is an evidence of the voice of doubt, showing that at the beginning of the journey, they had doubts. They doubted that the journey that they were embarking on may actually not be worth it. But moving on, stanza 2. There seems to be a shift. Stanza 2 says, then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet, below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a water mill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on the low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins, but there was no information. And so we continued, and arriving at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place, it was, you might say, satisfactory. Now in stanza 2, there seems to be a shift, both physically and spiritually. Now the shift in the weather condition is one thing that is worthy of note here. We see that in the first line of stanza 2, it says, then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley. In the first stanza, it says the dead of winter, that the weather was cold and harsh. But then in the second stanza, things begin to turn out well. It says, then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, meaning that it's as if there is a shift for the better. White below the snow line, smelling of vegetation. Smelling of vegetation is a sign of life, a sign that there is life around them. This is in contrast to the first stanza, where it says that everywhere was covered in snow and the temperature was very cold. Then he goes ahead to say, and 3 trees on the low sky. When we look at this line, it is an example of allusion. 3 trees on the low sky is an allusory device, or it alludes to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ on the cross, where you have 3 crosses with the 2 thieves by the side and Jesus Christ in the middle. Then he continues and says, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. The old white horse used by the poet here is also significant. it could mean, or we could say that it signifies or it announces the coming of the Savior Jesus Christ, as prophesied by Isaiah. Then we also have, then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel. The use of vine leaves and lintel is also significant. Vine leaves here could also be referred to Jesus Christ calling himself the true vine. And then when we look at lintel here could also mean that the writer is trying to say that there was a threshold, meaning that in this second stanza there was a Passover. So the Passover from the previous life or the previous world and then into a new world. So it seems there is a spiritual rebirth, or there is a rebirth, either a rebirth or a birth. He continues saying, 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. These 2 lines refer to the hands that the battering of our Savior Jesus Christ at the time when he was being betrayed, how he was betrayed and how he was sold for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. Then he continues, but there was no information, and so we continued. This could also mean, or this could also refer to the journey of faith. In your spiritual journey, there could be a time when you may seek answers, but there may be no answers. So he says here, they continued in faith, and arriving at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place, it was, you might say, satisfactory. So at the last line of the second stanza, they arrived at the place. And what is this place? The place of the birth of Jesus Christ. So it was as if they had just arrived a moment after, or just after, the birth of Jesus Christ. And what was their reaction? They said it was satisfactory, meaning that it was not as flamboyant as they thought it would be. It was not what exact thing they thought it would be. But then, in faith, they accepted it the way it is. Moving on in stanza 3. In stanza 3, the tone changes, or the time changes. So if you look at the first line of stanza 3, it says, all this was a long time ago, I remember. Meaning that the poet is reminiscing. He's actually trying to remember, he's remembering the journey as it happened in the past. Now, he's in the present. He said, and I will do it again. But set down, meaning take note of this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us. Like death, our death, we returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here. In the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods, I should be glad of another death. Now, you recall that the poet, or the poet persona in this poem was a magician, or is a magician. Now, from what he is saying, we would understand that he's trying to refer to his own transformation, his spiritual transformation, his spiritual rebirth. Meaning that he has left his old life, having encountered Christ, having met Christ, having been there at the birth of Christ, having witnessed the birth of Christ, he has left his old life. There has been a spiritual transformation, and so he has left his old life and now embraced Christ. So he said here, were we led all that way for birth or death? Now, the birth here is a renewal, transformation. It could be, we can look at it in 2 ways. Number 1, the birth of Jesus Christ, and then a spiritual transformation. That is a renaissance in spirit. Then we can also, the death here also refers to the death of Jesus Christ and also the death of the old life. He has jettisoned the old life and now he has embraced Christ, meaning that he is he's a new person in a new life. Now he says here, hard and bitter agony for us, like death, meaning that even though he has been born again, or he has undergone some spiritual transformation, even the new life is not without its own difficulties. It's not without its own trials. But he goes on to say that he prefers this new life. He says, we return to our places, these kingdoms. Now, these are people who were kings or who were royal people in their kingdoms. So we return to our places, these kingdoms, and they felt no longer at ease because they have undergone a spiritual transformation. They have been transformed, having encountered Christ. There has been a transformation. So they felt like aliens. He said, with an alien people clutching their gods, meaning that they felt like aliens being in the midst of people who were not Christians. So these are people who were once pagans and now they have embraced Christianity and now they're living in a new life. But then he says something that is profound. He said, I should be glad of another death, meaning that even though he has encountered this spiritual transformation, and even though he has encountered this spiritual transformation and he has gone back to his kingdom, he will be glad to be removed from these people. That is another death. So he will be glad to leave this old life, this world, to probably eternity, to meet Christ, and that is it. Now let's look at the further analysis of the poem. The poem is set in the harsh and arduous environments of the Magi's journey. The landscape is described as desolate and unforgiving. Now, if you look at especially in the first stanza, we see that the landscape was actually very desolate. It was harsh. The geographical setting was harsh and very, very difficult. It made things difficult for the Magi's journey. In stanza 1, we look at how the Magi encountered difficulties, how they were surrounded by a hostile environment, the surroundings, even the people that they were traveling with abandoned them in search of worldly pleasure. Now, this can also, when we look at this, it is also reflective of our spiritual journey on earth. You start out on a spiritual journey with people, and then at the end of the day, at some point, some people are distracted by worldly things. They abandon you, and then you continue on your journey. So this is what he could mean by this. Moving further, in stanza 2, the Magi experience a spiritual transformation, because as the journey progresses, the old life begins to ebb away and the new life comes to the fore. They're beginning to question their beliefs and traditions. They realize that the old life that they were living was not compatible with the new reality that they are facing. Then in stanza 3, this is where they encounter Christ. Witnessing the birth of Christ was an encounter for them. It depicts the moment where the Magi finally arrive at the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and it also depicts their encounter with Christ as it fills them with awe and sense of loss. They realize that they had been missing out on so many things in this new life. Okay. Now let's look at the themes that are explored. In the poem. We have here, it said, the journey of the Magi explores themes such as spiritual transformation, sacrifice. I've talked about spiritual transformation. Then we look at sacrifice. They had to sacrifice. They had to make sacrifice. If you're looking at it both on the spiritual angle and the physical angle, they had to make a lot of sacrifices. They sacrificed their time, they sacrificed their pleasure, they sacrificed their comfort just to witness the birth of Christ. Then, if you look at it, if you're looking at it from the spiritual angle, it says a lot about the sacrifices one has to make when it comes to the spiritual life. So as they embarked on this spiritual journey, they had to make a lot of sacrifices. They had to leave the old things in their lives, the things that gave them comfort, the things that they used to enjoy. Remember, we are looking at the Magi as people who were part of royalty. Okay, so having left their kingdoms to embark on this journey, there was a lot of sacrifice that they need to make. They had to leave old things. Old things passed away, and they had to allow themselves to be renewed and be refreshed and be transformed by this. Then we have the clash of old and new beliefs. Now, in the course of their journey, they had to question some things. They had to question their old beliefs, their old traditions, their old systems. They had to juxtapose these two systems to understand whether they are compatible or not. Now, upon doing this, they realized that the new system or the new life was better. So in their spiritual journey, or in their journey as faithfuls or Christian faithfuls, there was a lot of questioning. And this also applies to the life of every Christian. There will be a lot of questioning. You question your old beliefs and then try to juxtapose it with the new tradition, with the new system that you are faced with. Then the next one is the search for meaning and truth. As you grow older in your spiritual life, you search for meaning and truth. Now, on the other hand, the Magi also search for meaning and truth, meaning that they heard that there will be a birth, that there will be a Messiah. So it was their quest for knowledge, their quest for meaning that drove them to search out the Messiah, to search out the king that will be born. And upon doing that, we can say that they search for meaning and truth. Looking at it on the other hand, we can also say that the poet persona was in search of meaning and truth. Okay? In fact, it is understood that the poem is metaphorical. It actually reflects or talks about the spiritual journey of the poet, T.S. Eliot. He uses the poem to explore his own spiritual journey, to analyze his own spiritual journey, because it was understood that he converted into the Anglican community. So writing this poem was just a way of showing that he has undergone some transformation. All right. Going further, we also have that the journey of the Magi is relevant because its biblical context resonates with themes of personal transformation, faith, and the struggle to find one's place in a changing world. Okay, because when you look at it this way, you also find out that the word, in the title you have the journey of the Magi. The word journey is actually encompassing. It looks at one's journey in life, one's journey to finding oneself, one's journey to finding one's truth, one's journey to finding one's identity. So we can actually analyze this poem in so many ways, looking at it from the spiritual angle, looking at it from the physical angle, looking at it even from the angle of life generally. Okay. Other things here look at alienation or estrangement following change. When people undergo change, they seem to be alienated from their past life. They seem to be alienated from their surroundings. Okay? As it is in the Christian faith, when someone is reborn, when someone gives his life to Christ, the person feels estranged. Sometimes people may even question, what is wrong with you? Why are you behaving this way? So this estrangement is an evidence that there has been a transformation in the life of the Christian faithful. Going further, we have the unity of birth and death in man's spiritual journey. As one journeys in this life spiritually, there has to be a rebirth or there has to be a birth and there has to be a death. The death of the old life and the birth of a new life. Doubt as an integral aspect of the journey of the faithful. And now this is one thing that is true. As in your spiritual journey as a Christian faithful, you'll be filled with doubts. Every Christian faithful, but anybody who embarks on spiritual journey is always filled with doubts, because you have to question so many things. Question your beliefs, question the things you already know and the things you thought you knew. The next one is suffering as a necessary ingredient for spiritual rebirth. In one's spiritual growth, long suffering has to be there. One must suffer. Suffering in this case does not mean that spiritual rebirth must always come with suffering. Suffering in this case means that you encounter difficulties because you are trying to make a shift from your old life to the new life. So it's not going to be easy. So this suffering is something that must be there for there to be a transformation, for there to be a renewal, for there to be a rebirth. Let's look at some poetic devices that are used in the poem. We have symbolism. Okay, let's look at the images in the poem. We have the images of suffering and hardship. The images of suffering and hardship are examples are cold coming, that is the cold weather, worst time, that's an example of imagery. Long journey. The long journey itself is an imagery. It denotes suffering and hardship. Imagine embarking on a long journey, and in this case, this is a journey that you must undergo. You must undergo that journey. You must embark on that journey. So it is the word there, journey, long journey, creates a mental picture in the mind of the reader of suffering and hardship. Weather sharp, dead of winter, sore-footed. There are so many other examples of imagery of hardship in the poem. Then we have images of doubt, for example, empty wineskins, regret, cursing, folly, evening. These are images of doubt. These are images that the words that the writer uses to create doubt. Image of doubt in the mind of the reader. Then we have images of hope, dawn, vegetation, running stream, valley, vine leaves, white horse, etc. These images create a mental picture of new life, of a sign of life, of renewal or freshness. Okay. In conclusion, The Journey of the Magi is a profound and thought-provoking poem. It offers us insights into human spiritual enlightenment. It says here, it remains a timeless piece of literature that continues to inspire readers to reflect on their own journeys in life. Thank you.